We have two different cohorts, young and old. The young people want prices to come down. The old people don't. The Biden administration kicked the can. The Trump administration is trying to probably kick the can. They're going to try to keep the AI bubble as inflated as possible because that's really the only game in town in terms of GDP. It was over half of the GDP the last couple of quarters. So, if you're buying Nvidia now at this price, these price levels, it's going to take, in my humble opinion, you might earn your money back in 10, 15 years.
Many of those large projects are showing early signs of stress. How confident are you that this becomes an outrise, housing recession rather than a long freeze?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an outright housing recession. And new permits peaked in 2022, and they are generally speaking a very, very good indicator of a slowing housing market. And what really held up the housing market and helped with the economy was the multi-tenant housing boom. And that was driven largely in part by immigration. We haven't seen such a boom in units as we have since the 70s. And those projects are longer lived and take longer than single family homes. So that's why construction is held up. But because this is all rolling over, construction is going to start to falter. And housing, again, is 20% of the consumption economy. And that's going to filter into everything else. So the cracks are there. Things are rolling. The question is, how fast does this go? If layoffs really start to happen in earnest, this could happen pretty fast. And it seems to me that corporations are starting to shed people pretty quickly.
This is the trigger point. Housing markets don't crash just because prices are high. They crash when people lose jobs and forced selling begins. If you want to stay ahead of this developing recession, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Now, look at who is actually holding the bag.
Yeah. We're seeing new evidence. I mean, obviously, we talked about those credit card balances, but auto loan delinquencies are rising sharply too, and especially among lower income households. Are analysts underestimating the risk because they're looking at averages instead of, distributions? Could this be something that we didn't want to actually deal with? I mean, do policymakers actually want prices to correct, or will they use every tool to defend nominal prices?
Yeah, so we have the baby boomers who want prices defended. They own the homes, they own the assets, they own the financial assets. So we have two different cohorts, young and old. The young people want prices to come down, the old people don't. So this is going to be interesting to see the policies that are put forth. Obviously, the floating of the 50-year mortgage was a fig leaf to try to mollify both, to keep prices elevated and lower, monthly payments. That didn't go over so well. People didn't like that. People didn't like the idea of paying, much more interest over time and being a debt slave. So, I'm a believer that cycles eventually take root and you can kick the can down the road. The Biden administration kicked the can. The Trump administration is trying to probably kick the can. They're going to try to keep the AI bubble as inflated as possible because that's really the only game in town in terms of GDP. It was over half of the GDP the last couple of quarters. So, there's this interesting dynamic between the super wealthy, the baby boomers, and the millennials and Gen Z. And then, of course, there's Gen X stuck in the middle of all that.
Yeah, no kidding. And then you mentioned, we're going into midterms. If that's the policy bias, defending prices no matter what, doesn't that eventually become kind of politically explosive? You got an entire generation locked out of home ownership. How long is it sustainable?
Well, if you look at Trump's poll numbers, they've really crashed in the last 2 months. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's getting bad advice from his advisors. I think they underestimated the ability to hold those voters into the full 4-year term. A lot of the voters that came to Trump were independents and younger people, but the younger people's vote is up for grabs. They want results. They don't care about right versus left, and that's unfortunately why we saw Mamdani elected in New York. They want to change, and they're going to get change. Now, be careful what you ask for, but that's the dynamic. There's this sense of hopelessness amongst young people who can't find jobs. The job market is awful right now. There's hiring freezes everywhere. The most recent college graduates are sitting on the sidelines, and this is what's going on. And you know, if we keep asset prices too high for too long, this is why national populism is rising across the globe. There's too few. Whenever we get to this kind of wealth distribution, where it's really at the top 1%. This is when political chaos ensues. It's happened historically throughout time.
Ed is describing a financial civil war. Boomers need high asset prices to retire, while Gen Z needs a crash just to afford a home. No matter what the government does, one of these groups is going to get crushed.
Yeah. Do you think housing is now, the biggest driver of wealth inequality in America? If policymakers force prices higher, do they risk turning the housing market into just a permanent insider's game?
Yeah, that's a definite problem. I don't think they're going to be able to stop the cycle because rents are already coming down. And I'm hearing anecdotally people who bought, second and third homes on speculation to rent out are already finding that the market's kind of soured on them. And anecdotally, I'm hearing of people that are realizing they can't cover the full cost of their ownership, meaning the insurance, the taxes, and the mortgage. And now they're running losses on some of these things. And eventually some of these people will put these homes on the markets because they just say, you know what, I can't be bothered with losing money every month. So yeah. I don't think the government can really stop the cycle that's coming. And we have a demographic problem now that we've stopped the illegal immigration. Goldman Sachs put out a chart at the beginning of the year that suggested, with illegal immigration stopped and the birth-death model the way it is at the moment, we could actually have a drop in the U.S. population of 500K potentially for the first time in forever. So my humble opinion is that the cycle can be delayed, but it can't be stopped, and that God controls the long end of the bond market. And once the growth slowing is apparent to everybody, the bond end will price in slowing growth, which will set up the next recovery.
Yeah, well said. I'm going to use that quote too. If the goal is to defend prices here, aren't policymakers basically guaranteeing shelter inflation stays elevated? Doesn't that tie the Fed's hand at the next stage of the cycle?
Well, rents are coming down. Home prices are still sticky. Rents are already coming down. New tenant rents are imploding, and they can defend all they want. But right now, unfortunately, it's more the price of renting is cheaper than the price of ownership. And for homes to that usually is flipped the other way, over the long term. The only way for that relationship to rebalance is if home prices come down, which is what I fully expect once we get going along here into the teeth of the recession. And the Fed can do what they want to do, and the policymakers can try to hold prices up, but I don't think it's going to happen. And the credit markets. What drives inflation is credit creation, and credit creation is going the wrong way at the moment.
Ed, you've been describing an economy where the fundamentals on Main Street are deteriorating, yet Wall Street is acting, and they called it a new golden age, and that's largely because of AI. They think it'll save everything. Is Wall Street using AI as a distraction from the cracks that you're seeing in the real economy, or do you give any credit to the idea that technological cycles can paper over Main Street weakness?
Well, they certainly in the mainstream headline indices, the majority of the returns this year have been given to us by 7 to 10 stocks that are what is holding up the indexes. About right, I think currently right now, those 10 stocks are about 40% of the S&P 500 market cap. So certainly, the appearance is the stock market's fine. Underneath, there's issues if you look at different sectors and participation of the other non-10 stocks. However, I'm a believer in technology. I think long-term it can help. But we do have booms and busts and hype cycles. The dot-com cycle was a hype cycle. There was a lot of excitement and dreams about the advent of the internet, which eventually came to fruition, but much, much later. There's a lot of upfront investment that was overpriced, overhyped, and created long-term gains down the road. But the investors who initially bought a lot of those companies were wiped out. Same thing here with AI. AI is a tremendous amount of capex. It's the pricing of this thing to make money is not anywhere near realistic. OpenAI is hemorrhaging money. Weave is losing money. All these companies are losing money, and I don't think the end product is being adopted at a rate that.
This sounds exactly like 1999. Everyone is excited about the technology, but nobody's asking, where is the profit? If OpenAI and others are burning cash without returns, the stock valuations have no floor.
Justifies the return on investment. So what we're going to see is a pause in capex like we did in the dot-com cycle, and then valuations on these stocks will collapse, and then there'll be there'll be oversupply of Nvidia chips, as there always is in these cycles, and then pricing will collapse, and that's when the real benefits to the economy roll out over the next 5 to 10 years. There'll be new companies, new IPOs that come out of that. If you look at the dot-com bubble, look at the big companies that came out of the dot-com bubble. The only one that really survived was Amazon, but it was the companies that were IPO'd after the dot-com bubble imploded. Facebook, Google, Apple really took advantage of the cheap broadband that was overbuilt with their smartphones. So that's what I think is going to happen with AI. There'll be a lot of infrastructure. It'll be recapitalized at pennies on the dollar. Pricing will come down, and we'll see new AI companies and whatnot. And the technology will improve. There's too much of a hallucination rate. Corporations have done a lot of pilots, but they're abandoning those pilots because there's no return on investment. And ultimately, the bond markets are starting to get worried about getting paid on their investments in AI. Credit default swaps on CoreWeave and Oracle are going up. I'm not suggesting Oracle has a problem because they can just cut back capex and those, they can get cash flow positive again. But right. Capex is going to pause. The gating factor had been Nvidia chips. Now the gating factor is power. There's not enough power to hook these things into. So that's going to pause capex naturally. We just don't have enough power to, for every project that's been announced.
That's an interesting, especially people looking at those picks and shovels. I wanted to ask you about this new report. Before we do that, because you're just, you mentioned that you're a believer in technological revolutions. We're not just perma bears, but you've also said that every revolution comes with a boom and a bust. I mean, the telecom build out in the 90s was real, but the stocks were a graveyard. I mean, today AI is obviously sucking in trillions. Is Wall Street confusing real innovation with real returns? I mean, and if so, I mean, what part of the AI ecosystem do you think will be remembered the way that we remember the telecom equipment bust?
I think we're going to see lots of data centers filled with capacity that's not being used. And they'll have to become realistic about pricing. And that's when AI compute power starts to decline in price. And then, there'll be a lot of innovation and new companies that come from that, just like the dot-com bust. There was a lot of dark fiber. Now, people say this is different because chips depreciate much faster, and it's not the same thing. But, the stranded capacity will be used by someone at much lower prices, I believe.
I got to ask you, I was talking about that report. There's this new BlackRock strategist, Ben Powell. He was saying that we're in a picks and shovels capex super boom. Chip makers, power producers, copper wire manufacturers are positioned as winners. And, I'm curious about this because when you hear BlackRock, your former firm, telling investors to stay long AI and borrow aggressively, I mean, what goes through your mind? Is it conviction or is it just optimism at the top?
This call they're making should have been made about 3 years ago. This is the kind, they should have realized that this is going to be a trend and that there's going to be tremendous opportunity to make money from the picks and shovels. The picks and shovels trade has already happened. Now we're in the reality phase of the picks and shovels. Just like Cisco was a great stock at $7 earlier in the 90s, then went up to 80. That's kind of how I feel about Nvidia. Nvidia was a great stock, 3 years ago, and now it's at the end of its cycle. It's literally a $5 trillion market cap company, which is more than the whole of the Nikkei index. Yeah. It's pricing in. Look, Nvidia is a great company. Don't get me wrong, but it's pricing in so much growth that and I've been here before. I understand how this game works. Once the growth just second derivative slows, the valuation compresses, then eventually capex is paused and they start missing estimates. And the stock, will do what bubble stocks do. They'll go down, 80%. And it'll take 10, Cisco just got back to its .com price after 25 years. So, if you're buying Nvidia now at this price, these price levels, it's going to take, in my humble opinion, you might earn your money back in 10, 15 years.
That is a terrifying prediction for retail investors. If Nvidia follows the Cisco chart, buying today means your money could be dead money for a decade. It's a classic sign of a market top.